are welcome to ask questions. And if anyone watching via the live stream has a question for either Alison or Paolo, you can email us at eglover@chathamhouse.org or submit them via Twitter using #CH_GFFG, and we'll ask them on your behalf. I would like to note that given this is a live stream session, the Chatham House rules will not apply. Everything will be recorded. So I would now ask Alison to make a presentation on the next phase of indicators of illegal logging project. As many of you know, Chatham House have undertaken the first assessment in 2010, in which 12 countries have been covered. And the final report produced added another 7 countries. This was, the overall report was published in 2014, 2015 for covering 19 countries on global efforts made in global efforts to improve forest governance and address illegal logging. It was a very good, a very thorough undertaking, and I will leave Alison to give us what the next phase of that project is.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Shoa. So yes, as Shoa mentioned, we are about to launch on the 3rd phase of a project that Chatham House began over a decade ago, which many of you may know as the Indicators of Illegal Logging project. This project was designed to look at how governments and the private sector are responding to the issue of illegal logging and to assess the impact of these stakeholders on illegality in the sector. So the broader aim of the project has been to fundamentally to try and help support better policy making and implementation. So as Shoa mentioned, we've had 2 rounds of assessment to date. On the screen you can see some of the outputs from our previous research in this area. So the first assessment was completed in 2010 and the second assessment in 2015. I'll describe, first I'm going to run through the scope of the project, what countries we look at, and talk about what we're actually monitoring, and then I'll move on to what our plans are for the coming years under this project. So again, as mentioned, the project covers 19 countries, and in each of these countries, what we do is we look at a very wide range of data, and this is organized within a framework of indicators. There's 4 categories of indicators you can see here, and these are used to assess different aspects of the response to illegal logging. So running through each of these in turn, firstly, awareness. So that the logic behind looking at awareness is that see this as an important precursor to action. Sorry, just being told that there's no screen there. I don't know if we can get the main screen up as well. It may appear, we'll see. Awareness, yeah, that public awareness about these issues can be an important driver for action by governments and the private sector. So the indicators that we look at within this category, here we go, include looking at the domestic media coverage and the international media coverage of these issues. So look at the number of articles that cover this issue, and in more detail looking at what particular topics are being talked about to get an idea of what issues are on the agenda domestically. So here you can see some of the data we collected in 2015 for Vietnam. The second category of indicators relates to how the private sector is responding to this issue. There's three sets of data that we collect here. First of these relates to the level of certification. So we look at the area of forest that's under certification, or the proportion of companies with chain of custody certification. Secondly, also do analysis of the trade data to get an idea of how trade is shifting between different countries, and in particular between what we've termed sensitive and non-sensitive markets. And we also implement a survey of companies and of trade associations to get an idea of what industry itself thinks of what are the challenges in the sector, how they themselves are responding to this issue, and what impact it's having on their business. So again, I've just shown some of the data that we collected for our last report. Moving on to the government response. To assess how governments are responding, one large aspect that we look at is the policy framework. So we have a long list of questions that assess the policy framework in these different countries, looking at the design of the policies, and also we assess the level of implementation. And on that basis, we do a scoring system, and you can see the results of that at the top there for some of the countries. We also review data that's available on enforcement in the sector, and also the government revenues that are being collected. And thirdly, do a survey of country experts as well, to get their perspective on how they think their governments are dealing with this issue. The fourth category of indicator that I mentioned is that relating to the levels of illegal logging and trade. So this includes looking at trade data discrepancies, also drawing on data from the surveys of experts that we undertake, also do wood balance analysis where there is adequate data. And we also draw on the data that we have collected in the other areas, and use this to assess the levels of illegal production in the countries and the different types of illegality and how things are changing. And building on this, we then do assessments of the levels of illegal timber in international trade. And here you can find some of the graphics that we produced in 2015. So that is a very quick overview of what the project has entailed to date. As mentioned, we're now about to launch the third phase of this project. So I'd like to explain now just what it is that we're wanting to do in the next 3 years and how we'd like to achieve this. So I'm going to run through the questions that have briefly listed there at the top. So firstly, the question of why we want to do the phase 3 and what our aims are for the project. So yes, as the main aim of the project remains the same as I mentioned at the beginning, that we want to collect this data to help support more effective policy making in the forest sector and also beyond. So I think we do think that a lot of the information that we're collecting and the analysis that we do, we hope will also be of relevance for other sectors, in particular the agriculture and mining sectors and those that impact on forests. And of course, we also hope to keep attention on this issue and to help maintain or increase political support for continued action in this area. And I think the project can help achieve this through, firstly, providing robust data and analysis, but also a large, equally importantly, I would say, is by stimulating dialogue, in particular within the countries, about some of these issues. In terms of the who, so this is really who we see as the audience for our project. So the primary audience for us is the policymakers and decision makers in government. But linked to that, we also want to target other stakeholders who in turn can influence their governments. So as listed here, the NGOs, the private sector, researchers and journalists as well. But as mentioned earlier, I think the relevance of our research reaches beyond the forest sector. So in terms of a secondary audience, we hope that what we are going to produce will also be of interest to those stakeholders also working in other sectors. And in addition, another secondary audience is those working more specifically on monitoring of other policy processes. So I've mentioned here REDD+ and the Sustainable Development Goals, of course. In terms of where we're going to be working, we will be looking still at the same 19 countries that we've previously looked at, but we will be prioritising a smaller number of countries for our outreach, and that's something we're thinking about at the moment, trying to identify where it would make most sense for us to target our efforts. So thinking about where there will be particular opportunities for us to have an influence and an impact in the coming 2 or 3 years. In terms of the what it is that we're going to look at, so we have this indicator framework that we've used over 2 assessments now, and we want to keep that broadly the same because that does provide that continuity, and it means that we can look at how things have changed over the last decade. But in recognition of the fact that there have also been a lot of changes in the sector, we will be making some changes to the framework with some additional questions and including some additional data, hopefully, where we can find this. So there's three big changes, I suppose, that we want to reflect and think it's important for us to take into account. The first of these is that of the increased importance of social media. And so in terms of the assessment of public awareness, we want to also look at the use of social media and do an assessment of how illegal logging is being discussed in those forums. The second issue that we want to reflect better within the framework is that of deforestation, and specifically illegal deforestation. So we want to make some amendments to the questions that we are asking about the policy framework, to add enforcement data as well relating to illegal deforestation. And thirdly, looking at ways to potentially include the increasing amount of satellite data that's become available. And the third big issue is that of gender. So again, in terms of the policy assessment that we do, we are going to be adding some questions about how gender is dealt with in the policy framework of the target countries. Moving finally to the how question, so how we're going to implement this project over the coming years. A key message that I want to communicate this afternoon is that we do want this project to be as collaborative as possible. I'm very aware that there's a huge amount of work ongoing in the sector, looking at what is happening in the sector and various monitoring initiatives and so forth. And so we're keen to not reinvent the wheel, and also to make the most of the wealth of data and knowledge that is out there. And so how we want to try and achieve that is through what are called here digital first approach. So we will, and what that means in practice is that we're going to be putting together a new website for the project that will both make the current data and analysis much more accessible, and also the new data and analysis that we'll be producing. Will also enable us to update the data analysis much more frequently. And we also hope that it will be a valuable tool enabling others to contribute their own data and provide feedback and reviews of our own findings as well. So the websites that I've shown here at the bottom, here on your left, you can see our two current websites. So we want to draw on the best features of the current project website and also that of the illegal logging portal. That basically means that we'll be, yes, providing the data that we compile under the project, and also hopefully a lot of the reports and news from other organisations as well. And then we're also exploring at the moment how we could best provide some of the broader contextual information that others are gathering and assessing. So I've just shown a few examples on the left there of other work that is ongoing. I mentioned that we're keen for it to be a collaborative project, so I want to just illustrate here the sort of model that we have in mind. So the website or portal at the top there, and then it hopefully being very much a two-way process of others providing us with relevant data and information, us also providing data and information that is of value to others, such as yourselves. So the next steps for us, we're just at the start of this process. So I think the most important next step for us is finding out what everyone else is doing out there, what information is available, and who would be willing to share information and data with us. We are working with Saskia Zinga at the moment, who many of you will know, who's helping to review some of this information, and she may well get in touch with some of you to talk with you more about what you're doing. So we're also thinking about what particular research issues we should go into in more depth. So what issues are that we can use the data that we're going to be collecting under the indicators, and how we can use that to do more in-depth research into particular priority issues. So that's another big question. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're thinking about which countries it would make most sense for us to prioritise in terms of our outreach. And in parallel with the thinking about these questions, we're starting to think about what the website should look like, and we will, as our thinking develops on that, it's something that we will be letting you all know about and would welcome feedback on. So to conclude, I do hope that you will all be interested in engaging in this project and helping us with the research. I would welcome any initial comments and questions that you have this afternoon. We've also included a few questions in feedback survey for the meeting. So please do answer those, it'd be much appreciated. And of course, do get in touch with both myself or Saskia in the coming weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison, for updating us, and the relevance of updating the findings of 2010, 2015 is obvious, especially taking into consideration the elements that you mentioned, the issues of deforestation, role of media, and gender in policy processes, which is at the heart of our work the last few years. I would now call Paolo Ceruti, who will be talking about the project, which has been commissioned by the European Commission, in fact, to C4 on the global monitoring system for FLECT. It's you will tell us a project update which has started in 2018.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks a lot for resisting to this late hour. This is a presentation about this global level impact monitoring framework of the FLECT action plan. I didn't want to go too much into the details of what is a theory of change, what is an impact monitoring system, etc. But I still have to say something about what it is, what I think it is, and what I think it will look like in the future. So it's a whole team. The team is sitting here around in the room, and you will meet them today or tomorrow for more questions as well. And as Alison ended, questions and collaboration, and please do contact us in case you have information or data or feedback on what we are trying to do. So when I started discussing this project with somebody in the Commission, I said, oh, no, this is something, and this is the same phase that many of you today, discussing with my colleagues and asking them what are they doing, had. And so we're still into this phase of, ooh la la, this is super difficult. I don't know how you guys are doing this. So this was the first one. The second one is that, yeah, okay, after the 2, 3, 4 month initial, we hired up a team of super people with a lot of superpowers, and we are still hiring, and we think that we can do something, of course, with your help. So if you have some superpowers that nobody knows about, please let us know. So where did we start? We started from the two documents that you all know very well. One is the European Court of Auditors report 2015, and the other one is the evaluation of the action plan 2016. And we took 2 or 3 of the key points on which this effort is based. And so some of the specific recommendations were to improve the overall outcome and impact monitoring of the action plan, to strengthen the management capacity for delivering of the plan itself, especially at the central level in Brussels at the Commission, and to reach out to related sectors, multilateral fora and across the EC. So this is our starting point on why we are trying to build a system that will address these 3 points. No need to go into the details of what a theory of change is, but basically is where you are today, where you think you are today, and where you want to be tomorrow, say in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years. What we normally do is that we conduct this kind of exercise you have all seen, where you start from inputs, outputs, outcome, impacts, etc., across a temporal scale, and you do this over and over again until you are pretty clear on where you want to go. And this was one of the points of the auditors in 2015, back to the Commission. It's been difficult to find a line of where you want to go with the action plan, although there were different areas where it was more clear than in others. The other thing that you consider, so first, where you are, where you want to go. The second one is what you can influence and what you cannot influence. So what you can control under your own control, what you can influence and what you can attract in terms of interest from other people, okay? So these are two major frameworks that we use to deliver a theory of change. And then you have, of course, that's easy on paper, but along these two lines, so where you want to go and what you can influence, there's a lot of power games. There are people that have more powers than others and that can influence the process in a way that others cannot. So this is one important thing. It's the political economy of the whole effort, and it's important to keep in mind while you draw a theory of change. And the second one is, of course, there are points which you might not think, this is an amplifier, sorry. There are points which you might not think that are important, but they might be an amplifier of impacts or outcomes in the future. And so you need to pay attention to those points. And by discussing with people that know what the system is, we can point to those points and use them. When I say we, I mean the Commission, because the objective is to provide the Commission with some of these tools. So just an example, when you read the EFI 2017 report, the change is manifesting in cross-government coordination, stronger institutions, different ways of working, enhanced transparency, and more effective participation. Okay, these are, somebody would call them outcome. How do you know that 1 + 1 + 1 + 1 equals transformative change? So the question that we are raising now is which indicators do you use to address those outcomes? And this is it's the core of the exercise. We are not yet there, but just to have some ideas today, too many people already mentioned Vietnam, and here it's Cameroon and Vietnam. Of course, these are the imports that Vietnam declares, and these are the exports that Cameroon declares. So basically it means that trees grow in the sea. When they go on a boat, they arrive, they are the double of the volume. So what is this? This is an indicator in some case. It is an indicator of something. It could be an indicator that there has been more transparency. The same fact that today so many people were able to present about Vietnam and Cameroon and Congo, etc., means that there has been an improvement in transparency or in ways of doing things and stronger institutions. 15 years ago in this same room, that was not possible, or at least it was not possible as it is possible today. But still, it might be also not an indicator, just a verifier of illegal logging continuing. It's still something that we can use. And there's a lot of it out there, and we are trying to look for more indicators. But then there are also things like this one. You know, when you look at a satellite image like this, which actually was a little video that is not working here, but what is this? You have many of these patterns that now you can see with new technology. Alison was talking about social media, better satellite images, etc. So in some cases, you see things, but you don't know what is there, what's the indicator. And so what is the evidence that you can use in that case? It's also important. So what is out there already, like proxies? What proxy can we use? Alison was showing the global governance indicator. How can we use the global governance indicator to show that some part of the path between A and Z, where you want to go, are attributable, if you want, to the action plan or not? Okay? For the record, this is the border between Zambia and DRC, and that's rosewood that is going to China, used through a gap in the agricultural law. So basically, these circles here are clear-cut circles of 0.5 kilometers of rosewood. But again, how do you know? You need to go there, look at it, or you have to find it in some reports, in some proxies. So that's important. And ta-da, this is where we are. Don't read, don't look at it. What I want to show, this is the preliminary theory of change that after 4-6 months working with the three superheroes that you see sitting there and some others, we came up with. So basically, it is the action plan. You all know the action plan. You have read it 2003, and the work plan now that is still not official, but can be consulted. And so these are the 7 action areas that were the initial 7 action areas of the action plan, from input to impact. There is one layer, and that's why I put this red circle. So there are a lot of these links, and those links are exactly the path that we think, or the EU Commission think, from A to Z, where I want to be tomorrow. The last circle there is the SDGs. Why? Because it's important to be able to connect what we are doing with the action plan to some global contribution. And the SDGs at the moment are the ones that are more used and important. And so we are trying to link the theory of change also to the SDGs. These links are not final and they are all draft, but it's just to show you how it should work. And this is, of course, it's a nice picture. If you can like it or not, many color. But it's important what is behind it. That's why I'm trying to explain. And these points are also important because for each outcome or input, etc., you have different people with different power. So in this case, the 3 colors are government, private sector, and local communities. Each one of these little pieces have different people that can act or are responsible for different things. And it's important to put it from the beginning. What you think, who you think can act on that. Behind this, again, not to read, but behind this, there's a list of all the indicators that are possible out there, linked to each one of the 7 action areas of the action plan. So that as soon as you enter an information in one indicator, the indicator is linked immediately to which action area it's attributable, it goes into the action area, and then you are kind of able possibly to follow what are you having as an impact. Okay, we can have different definitions on impact, but that's basically the theory behind it. And where we are now is that this is finalized. We are discussing with preliminary with the Commission, with DG ENV, with DG DevCo, with EFI, with FAO-flagged, and then little by little we'll try to extend the network of consultants. It must be done in a small group, face-to-face, because you need to really go through 2 days of brainstorming about what you think is the good indicators for this, for this, for this. And then in 2-3 months' time, before the end of the year, we would have a more finalized version of the theory of change. And then in the next 3, 4, 6 months, we will try to start to run the machine. You know, you put the big pasta up there, and then you have the nice spaghetti coming down there. That's the idea. And the idea is by mid-2019, the system should be finalized, and then we will start to run and see what kind of spaghetti comes out there. And then there will be time still to test, because nothing is final so quick. Okay, so we did find some superheroes. Now this is part of the rest of the team. We also need to do a lot of yoga and relaxing, because to go through these things, it takes time. And with that, I think I didn't forget, apart from keep mentioning, so Bethany, Tatiana, and Nastasia, they are in the room. If you have questions on how they do that, it's to them, okay? Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Paolo, for making the complex things simpler in one page. Although linking the theory of change of FLECT action plan to SDG, it's quite complex, but congratulations. Congratulations, good start. Please. Okay, we will take questions from the audience here, as well as from those who are linked through the web.
Yeah, my name is William Kapuku. I'm the director of Congolese Chamber of Commerce and the vice president of Africa Security Forum, so based here in London. I'm very interested in the first research, first presentation about the illegal trade and also how to protect the forests and what country to prioritize. I was just speaking to Ian here. He's been also in the DRC for a long time, and we speak Swahili as well with him. So I will suggest, if it's possible, to look at the DRC rainforest. I know that it's the second biggest forest after the Amazon, and I've been there myself, and also in places that no human has put his or a foot in there. There are many illegal trades that's happening over there, and I can't name the countries. I think you can see it on many social media. It's just to suggest that whenever you want to also get some data, we are ready to provide you with some data as well, and also to provide you with some tips about how to engage with the local population, because most of the information are coming from the community that are living there. Also to also inform, and I can see where you said who to inform. The social media, and also to inform the people who are living in the diaspora as well. So because they can also cascade the messages elsewhere. And when it comes to your website, and I will also suggest, if it's possible, to protect the intellectual properties, and in these days of cybersecurity and cybercrime that is increasing, and how to protect, because they may come with fake news and more news into the website and make it to look not effective and full of fake news. Also, the last point is when it comes to security as well. Most of those, the forest, they are also elements of the terrorists like Boko Haram, and also other terrorists are hiding there. So it's just to be very, very cautious whenever you go over there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a comment. If you have any comments, really, because it's such suggestion. Any other questions?
Thank you. I'm Paul Eastwood from DFID, based in Indonesia. It's a question really for Alison. So be really interested in the assessments, the updates on particularly about rates of illegal logging. I presume broadly comparable methods will be used from previous assessments, so you could from that infer trends. So I wonder about how, say, in particular with Indonesia, what plans there might be to engage there with since the last assessment. There's been the implementation of the Fungtilas and Flegti licensing. If there were high rates of illegal logging identified, then that would be a very sensitive issue. So how to handle that with government, how to involve them. I presume official data would be used, perhaps some unofficial data. And maybe then that would be justified to consider Indonesia as a priority country to engage with. Politically sensitive for Indonesia, but also, of course, with those that have contributed and within Europe as well, given that the licenses are now operating. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you. Alain Carsanti from CIRAD. I have two questions or comment for Paolo. Generally, when you try to do an impact evaluation of a policy, a public policy, the kind of things you try to do is try to find a counterfactual. That is another country, another project, another site you can with and without the project. The big difficulty is that you are comparing public policies, and you cannot find a twin of Indonesia or Ghana, for instance. You cannot compare. You cannot find a country that is totally similar but without the FLECT, with and without the FLECT. This is a big difficulty we know in evaluation specifically for attribution. For instance, the case of Brazil is very interesting because Brazil is a country that refused to enter into a VPA with the European Union. But country probably is the tropical country who, at a stage, decided really to enforce its own law, resulting with an impact of a reduction of deforestation in the dramatic reduction of deforestation in the Amazon. So it's difficult to compare. At some point, this discussion took place in Brazil. Was it a consequence of REDD+, or the $1 billion given by Norway? Or was it because Brazil government decided at this time to become a responsible power and to have a permanent seat at the Security Council, etc., etc.? So the attribution is very difficult when you have some political will, which can differ. You can have a decision of a country to become credible in terms of rule of law, with or without VPA, and very difficult really to disentangle and to decide what is really what you can attribute to VPA, to REDD+, or to the own political decision of a country like Brazil, for instance, who can be Gabon also, who is another example who have refused to enter into VPA or is not very active in that. The second problem is about sustainability and legality. We can have some countries that decide to be more to tackle illegal logging, but decide really to have a policy to convert most of the forest into palm oil. So you can be more tough in terms of regulation, but to decide that your future will be a future with agribusiness, etc., etc. So, in your theory of change, do you think it will be? What will be? How do you put the balance, and what will be your analysis of this kind of impact or non-impact? I don't know of VPA.
Yep. Do you want to answer now before we ask other questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Here, Paolo will answer.
For the second, you want to start or should I go?
Go ahead.
This is not an impact assessment of the VPA. It's an impact assessment. It's a system to monitor the impact of the action plan. I will not go in any VPA country to collect primary data that could feed the theory of change. So the VPA is one element. It's one of the 7 action areas. Of course, it features there. It's in the system. But the impact is of the action plan. So if you have one point at the beginning where it says that there is more transparency and you have data to prove that, that's fine. If you have that you need to have legal timber, da-da-da-da-da. Sustainability is an objective of the action plan, but it's not its target, direct target, okay? So I agree with you, there is a difference between the two. But here it's really from taking a step back and say, okay, what impact am I having as the implementer of the action plan? And that was the problem that the auditors had, if I understand it correctly, Julia, if I'm wrong, when they came and they said, okay, you have spent XXX money, you have done this a lot, but what was your idea, initial thinking for spending that money in this way? So this will be a system that provides an answer to that question. And it leads also to the first one, of course, counterfactual. The problem with counterfactual is that we will probably need the entire money that has been spent on action for the FLEG action plan on the field to do a fully counterfactual analysis of the action plan. So I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, it can be done on little smaller samples of when you want to have an idea of what kind of impact you are having maybe in one category, in one country, then you can find counterfactual. This morning I had an idea with Civil Society from Ghana. They were comparing cocoa and forest with the FLEG DPA. Of course, it's not a counterfactual, but it's two processes. And it's an idea. It can be done. At the moment, out there, the reply that the Commission can give in many times is, we don't know. And we would like just to fill that gap. You can say, I know that I'm contributing. You know, it's not forcefully causality, but I know that I'm contributing. And I can tell you that I'm contributing because of this and this and this indicator. That's as much as we can try. Do you want to add something? It's okay.
Can I ask Alison to add, if you have something to add?
I was just going to respond to Paul's comment that just on the question of political sensitivities. I mean, yes, as you rightly say, if you start making assessments of levels of illegality, it is very sensitive. And certainly, yeah, I mean, the best way around that is to try and engage as much as possible with the government in particular, and we do certainly use official data wherever possible, and also with other national stakeholders. And I think, I mean, given that assessing illegality is by its very nature fairly subjective, to some extent, the most, for our purposes in this type of project, because it's not about doing risk assessments for the private sector, it's about finding out where the problems are and where progress has been made. So the biggest value is in trying to use the analysis to start a discussion with those involved. So that's what we want to try and implement.
Okay. Julia wanted to ask you a question.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Julia Faulkner. I work with the Department for International Development here in London. And Paolo, I have a question for you on your process. To understand, I certainly appreciate your need to start having in-depth conversations and then growing them. I was a little bit concerned by your response to Alain's question, to understand how you intend to engage with the community of practitioners that are outside Europe, so our partners or other countries, in building this construct. So I don't mean as a subject of collecting information, data and analysis, but actually as part of its design. And I say that in particular because the genesis of the EU Flagged Action Plan was Europe's response to a global set of policy commitments that we made in a number of different forums. So in Bali, in Yaoundé, and in St. Petersburg. So it was specifically a policy response to a set of political commitments that were political commitments made at a global level, or at least a regional level, speaking to a global problem. So I don't think it's very easy to define, to put boundaries around the space which is only Europe, however one wants to construct Europe. So I'd be curious to understand sort of what's your process of taking your thinking and your theory of change beyond the walls of Europe.
Yeah, I think speak with us.
I don't think I have a clear answer. We are still thinking about this. My idea was that if we start with my idea, but also discussing with DevCo, if we start with those that are more they have been engaged a lot, like FAO-flagged, EFI, etc. They will provide some of the feedback like the one that you just provided, right? And then we can put it up on the table with DevCo and say, okay, how do we move? Because there are also the member states in those that we should consult. And so the approach is going one by one, and definitely, certainly, we all aim to go much broader than Europe. Where and how, it's still not defined. We will have to have some feedback from all of you guys, because it's one of probably the most important thing for ownership, for having the machine working later on. It will be done. How, at the moment, I really cannot still see.
The other?
Thank you. Connie McDermott from Oxford University. I'm particularly interested in social impact dimensions in FLAG-T. So in the action plan, it says that that we will ensure that the actions within the FLAG-T action plan do not harm poor people. So I'm wondering, in terms of looking at an overall evaluation of what's going on, what sort of assessments are being done in that regard. For example, in existing legality standards, existing legal frameworks, what would it mean to actually enforce legality? What impact would that have on poor people? I think one challenge with doing these types of analyses is I'm not sure whether, for example, in Paolo, in your study, if it's just collecting evidence of what good things are happening, or if it's trying to do also a sort of overarching assessment of, pros and cons. Will it look at, for example, in Peru, where there's a lot of cases of communities being fined because of the behavior of logging companies on their land and all these kinds of things? Is that coming out in these studies? Thanks.
I'll take another question.
Thank you. Ian Redmond, I chair the Ape Alliance, but I'm here for the Born Free Foundation today. In your request for potential additional superheroes, not me, I have a friend in the States who might be able to help you, because if you're trying to analyze very large data sets, he runs a company called Data Mining International, which offers its services commercially, but for developing countries that are trying to get on top of their illegal wildlife trade, and that would include illegal timber trade, he is prepared to provide his software for free, or at least expenses only. So if you need to see patterns in trade, and very often the anomalies in those patterns are linked to illegal activity, I'd love to put you in touch with him. So that's one potential superpower that you might not have on your team yet, I don't know. I also, if I may, just make an observation, having sat here during the day. I've learned a lot about systems, more and more complex systems that are trying to tackle the illegal timber trade. But the illegal timber trade is obviously a subset of the global timber trade, and the legal timber trade is possibly the smaller part of that global trade. And we have a number of countries that, for either ethical or legal reasons, care about where they source their timber and timber products. And these complicated systems that we've been hearing about are set up to try and cater for that demand. But it just leaves the probably largest section still going to the countries that don't have ethical or legal criteria for their trade. So the reality, and I'm thinking of this in particular in relation to last week's WWF report, State of the Planet report, which reported that average declines for animals around the world are 60% in the past 40 years. So we're getting more and more tied up with a subset of this global issue. I wonder how do you see this expanding to try and actually affect things in the forest? I know that's what we're all aiming to do, but I'm coming from the point of view, I want to see healthy forest ecosystems which protect the animals as well as the plants, because they're as important in the forest ecosystem as the plants. And I'm not hearing much reassurance that this is likely to happen. So we're seeing these declining animal populations, fragmenting ecosystems, and I don't know that this is the solution to that. It might make it possible to detect legal timber and trade in that for those who just want to trade in that, but is it actually going to affect that bigger picture that last week's WWF report outlined in frightening detail?
Thank you. I will ask first Paolo to answer those questions, because they are quite complex, before we go to additional questions.
When we have 6, 7?
No, the last one I will give.
No, I mean, what time we're staying here, until 7?
No.
Connie.
5 minutes.
It's part of the indicators. The member states require also the social impacts. We will need to define what we mean and see whether indicators exist, if they exist, if there are proxies that we can use. In some cases, I think it should be possible. I cannot speak for the Commission, but I think it should be possible to do ad hoc studies to highlight exactly the point that you're making, or the points that some others have been making in this room for many years. And that should feed into the theory of change, I think. And it will be able to provide answers to the Commission that maybe some areas needs more investment because there is no data or because you are risking a lot. It's also the risk that you have at different points through the theory of change, you see? And if it is a risk that the social impacts, there are evidence that is risky, then maybe you can direct. That's also the tool that the auditors were suggesting to the Commission. Maybe you invest more on that. See, you take away for some others that are already going, say the VPA are signed and fine, and you put it on social. And then you collect the data. That's the idea I have on how you raise those topics into the system, those feedback loops, you know. That's what they tell me it's possible in an impact monitoring system.
Just a last one. We don't stay until 7. Yes. Just a last one. Ruth.
There was a comment.
Ruth Munnison. I work on the Forest 2020 project, but I'm also an independent consultant. And it's very difficult for me to ask this question because I have a background in anthropology, so I don't know why I'm focusing more on quantitative indicators. But I wanted to ask both Alison and Paolo what they felt about the key performance indicator 8, which the ICF key performance indicator 8, which is about avoided hectares of deforestation. So it's a really basic indicator, quantitative indicator, which is trying to show how much what is the impact of all FLECT or the forest governance and markets climate change. It was set up. It's one of the indicators used by DFID. So what do you think about that? I know the social side is always really important, but I think that would be a very robust indicator to think about. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's general comment.
What do I think about that indicator? I mean, I think, yeah, it's a valuable indicator, certainly. But as for me, what is perhaps of most interest is the underlying governance. And for me, I think what a lot of the work that we're involved in and trying to achieve is better governance. And then so better decisions are then going to be made, hopefully, about the forest sector and the other sectors beyond that. So I think we need to look at all these different aspects in order to try and to get that bigger picture. I'm not sure if that answers the question. That's the best I can do.
Do you have any comments? Thank you very much. I think we could stay here, as Paolo said, beyond even 7 p.m. to talk about indicators, about how should a theory of change should be constructed without the ownership of those who are part of the whole policy process. I think it's a huge subject, but I think what it shows is the expectations are different from which angle you come. So the most one can do is, based on the resources, based on the expectation of the one which is commissioning the study. But having said that, I think there has been quite useful comments, which would be useful to integrate as much as possible. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I have been given a task to let you know a few things. There is an evaluation forms to fill. For those of you who are not coming tomorrow, please take the form if you could fill the evaluation form for the day, and you would leave it with people who are Chatham House staff who are there. And also for those of you who are not coming tomorrow, please keep your badges. If you don't want to keep them, you could leave them at the reception and you could pick them tomorrow. There will be drinks from 5 to 7, so everybody is invited for that reception. And it's an opportunity also to continue some of the discussions of today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.